about is about nonprofits. What is the role of a nonprofit in urban forestry? And we've been at it, our city forest, for 30 years. Next year will be our 30th anniversary.
Woo!
And if you count the year prior or the 2 years prior to that, then yeah, it's a little older even still, before we were formally incorporated. So the role of the nonprofit, it can be a lot of things in different cities depending on what the expectations are. But in our case, when we were founded in 1994, it turned out that the city didn't have any funding for trees. And so in addition to getting volunteers and a lot of all the things that go, the information and referral and having an arborist to be able to help residents and all of those things, it turned out that we also needed to raise money. If we were going to have all these thousands of volunteers have something to do, and we were going to really help our community. And so we started at that time. It's 30 years later. I actually still don't have a grant writer, and it's something I do in my spare time. And and that's okay because our team is so passionate and dedicated. So we've actually raised the funding to date to plant over 75,000 15-gallon trees and
Wow.
25,000 shrubs.
Nice.
You might say shrubs.
Woo!
Thank you. My team is awesome, and it isn't just my team, right? But let me back up. Shrubs, they are part of the urban forest. So sorry, shrubs, I will leave you out. And so we often say 100,000 trees and shrubs over the 30 years. Now, if we were to start that work today, it would cost over $50 million to do that. And that is with our doing it as a nonprofit. If it wasn't a nonprofit, kind of putting it all together, if it's more government run, it would be 3-4 times that, easily. So that is part of the role of what a nonprofit can do. And a nonprofit can engage the community. So it isn't just that we planted 75,000 trees, and we often cringe when people want to know, how many trees did you plant? Because we think it's more important whether the trees lived and how many people were engaged. So we easily have engaged over 150,000 people, all people who've signed in to our events. And they've all received some amount of training, whether they've gone through our Tree Amigo classes to be ongoing, coaches, planting coaches, or whether they just came for the event because it was in their neighborhood or at their school. So I'm more proud of that than the number of trees. And I'm also proud to say that we've provided 1 year of job skills training to over 550 AmeriCorps members.
Wow.
Now, why is that a big deal? Because our team isn't supposed to be planting trees, right? If we are the ones that are planting the trees, not very many trees would get planted. But our staff is training the AmeriCorps members, who in turn are coaching the volunteers in the community. You are planting those trees. You are adopting them. You are helping to water them those first 3 years. And that is how cost effective our organization can be when people are able and willing to adopt a tree and water it for 3 years. And we stay in touch for 3 years with our stewardship program. Every tree that I mentioned has a signed stewardship agreement. So we planted, for example, in over 100 parks. I think it's like 110 or something now. Mostly in San Jose, but in the surrounding areas, which include Santa Clara. We've planted in a few parks here as well. But the financing, I have to stress, is not coming from the cities for those trees. The financing is coming from these outside grants that we're leveraging, primarily state grants. And our AmeriCorps program is coming from the federal government. So as a nonprofit, we've been piecing these together. For Santa Clara, I've gotten sponsors, corporate sponsors, to sponsor the park planting. But I want to talk, I don't know, it sounds like I'm just going through a list of accomplishments, but what I'm trying to do is just give you the context for how a nonprofit operates and how that can help the community and continue to help the community. Because if you want a lot of trees to get planted, which people are talking finally about trees. For 30 years that we've been operating, trees weren't sexy. It wasn't a big deal to anybody. And it was hard to get support. And the only grants we could get were from the state. And luckily, they had the vision. They were ahead of the game. They understood the importance. So in 1994, we were created to be not just an environmental nonprofit, but an inclusive environmental nonprofit. I didn't want all of our stuff in brown and green. I wanted it in bright colors. And our newsletters were purple and pink and green. And I didn't want it to be mainstream. And we had all of our program materials in 5 languages in 1994. Because we were going to be different, and we were going to do it like it mattered. Every corner of the city and surroundings. So it's so wonderful to hear people talking about trees now. And it's even wonderful that the city of San Jose seems to be on board with the idea, anyway, that trees are important. And I know that when it comes to the low-income areas, East San Jose, so we've been planting, my first board chair actually is from East San Jose. We got a grant to plant trees in neighborhoods near 101. We planted thousands of trees at the Mayfair neighborhood, the Sloniker School, just some that I remember. Lots of areas in East San Jose. And we have continued to do that over the 30 years. Now, the state now is focused on funding only these areas, which is a good thing. But our grants, by and large, went to transportation projects to mitigate the impacts of all those additional cars and the noise and the pollution and what have you. And so they naturally were also in these low-income areas, and that's why we were able to finance so many trees over time. More recently, just in the last 6 years, we've gotten grants to plant only in those areas. The grants totaled 6,000 trees, and we've planted 4,500 of them. Just in the lowest, highest impacted census tracts of San Jose. A few in Gilroy and Morgan Hill, and there's even a little tiny piece of Santa Clara that is eligible. Now we have 1,500 trees right now, more than we have funding for, and so we're looking for places. And that's what's exciting about hearing everybody. I mean, Karina came up and said, I have an opportunity to plant 100 trees from a sponsor. And I'm like, okay, well, tell me more. How are they going to be taken care of? What species? Where? All that good stuff. But I think that this, Darcy's talking about all the benefits, the importance. Our city forest can't do this alone. We need all of these voices out there recognizing the value of planting trees in cities. We called it an environmental injustice in 1994. There wasn't a fancy term for it. I like the term tree inequity because I think that just nails it. We didn't use that term, but that didn't keep us from doing our job. And now, a lot of people want to do that. So I'm going to tell you what some of our challenges have been in planting in these high-impacted, low-income areas. We've never gotten money to cut cement from the city. So every grant we've had, we have written in money for cement removal for 30 years. Well, I take that back. For the maybe not the first 7 years, whenever it was first eligible as an expense. And that means it's a straight cost for us. We hire cement removers. We have to take it out of the money we would have for staff. But because we know that if we're going to plant trees in these areas, we got to remove the damn cement. It's a huge burden. The other thing is there are a lot more renters. If you're going to plant a tree, you have to have permission of the property owner. Is that, do you think? So the work that our city force does before a tree gets planted is by far and away the most difficult part of the work that we do. Because every tree we've planted, like I said, has a steward that signs up. Because with our model, we can't afford to go out. We don't have people. The volunteers that are the recipients, they're helping to establish the trees. And why is that important? Because they're vested in the tree. Because they are growing their environment. They are the change. They are the change. I'm going to, and it isn't just like, oh, someone comes along, plants a tree for them, waters a tree for them. I mean, there are instances, don't get me wrong, where that can work well. Like a major media where you don't have residents to participate. But a lot of the work we do is also at school. So we've done, say, I've been saying it for so long, it's got to be a lot higher, but it's over 250 schools have received free trees through our school. And that means that someone at that school has a client stewardship agreement, and we track the health of those trees. Now, can we make them fill out these forms? No. But I can guarantee you that just having that conversation is enough to make a difference. And when we have to do inspections, we have so many, I's to dot and T's to cross with all these grants that, and we do, every tree in our database has a longitude, latitude, put in the database and the address, the species, when it was planted, and how we connected to our volunteer database, who was there, blah, blah, blah. So we're kind of nerds when it comes to keeping the data. And so, where was I?
We're kind of nerds about the data.
Yeah, I remember that part. Nerds about the data, because I got off on the data because I'm such a nerd. Anyway, so we keep all that information, and we want to make sure that we know. We even have an animated clip. It's about 5 or 7 seconds long, and it shows you, using our database points, all the trees we've planted over 30 years. It's kind of really fun to see. But what it doesn't show you is all the trees that have died or been removed. It doesn't show you that. And we can't get that data from the city. It's not something that is, but we know, and this is the bigger picture that our city force works on. I'm going to tie it together with what I was talking about before, which was barriers, the obstacles that you have to overcome in these really high impacted areas. So we talked about cement. And why do they have more cement? And Darcy talked a little bit about that. Well, they have more cement because, that's where the industrial zone is. That's where, the history of redlining has made all the difference in the world as to what happened in terms of land development. And it's why they haven't had tree canopies. So when people go in and say, how many trees can we plant here? They only look at the available planting rows. And the city funded a whole study on that. And I'm like, wait, what about all the places that are cemented over where there could be trees? Now, of course, we're talking a lot of money that nobody wants to spend because, at least in the 30 years I've been doing this, trees have never been a priority with the city. Never. So I think, hopefully, due to the media, that is changing. So ownership is the other obstacle. And the fact that the city of San Jose, unlike Santa Clara, the city requires the residents to take care of their own street trees. They have to pay to have them removed, and they have to pay to have them replanted, unless they're lucky enough to be in an area where we have a grant. But those grants are always in very restricted areas. So, and we certainly don't have money to pay to have the tree removed. That there is an environmental injustice issue. Why would someone adopt a tree knowing they have to take care of it? And we had that conversation with them. So the fact that we planted that many trees, about 15,000 in East San Jose area, shows you they want these trees. The schools want the trees. And, you know, we also plant businesses and we plant in yards. And because sometimes the street tree situation can't work out. But tying it to this bigger picture is policy. What are we doing? If we're serious about making change to land development, community development, we have to work with our leaders. Believe me, I've been trying for 30 years, and we cannot do it by ourselves. We aren't doing it by ourselves. We are nothing. We're a nonprofit. And for a lot of city people, nonprofits just, they can be disposed of easily. And so we need leaders to decide, get that pruning program reinstated now and just make that a priority. It's not tree planting that's going to solve the problem that we have. In some areas, yes. You should have seen 30 years ago we had more barren areas than you could even, I mean, it was unbelievable. But we planted 80 trees here and 100 there and 50 there for years, and those neighborhoods are canopied now. And now it's infill. Almost all infill. Or the schools maybe put in a soccer yard. They had to take out their trees and now they want to somewhere else. Those are the kinds of things. But the policy, we can't change a policy. You're required to have a street tree, but our city forest can't enforce that. Only the city can enforce that. That's what they need to be doing. Or they need to be paying for cement removal. We can't spend all of our grant money on cement removal. The city has to decide. That's a priority. And let our city forest know, hello, we have a lot of trees to plant and we need someone to pay for the cement removal. Because those 75,000 trees, I can guarantee you that probably 98% of them were planted by the whole being hand dug by volunteers. 150,000 volunteers have put their blood, sweat, and tears into the growth of San Jose and the surrounding area of urban forest. Not as much in the surrounding areas I would like, because I do have a great idea for a green print for the whole area, but we're just barely making it with what we do. And so that idea of what leaders can do, that's where we need your voice. Put it into this model that's cost effective. Don't put it into truck watering. The commercial tree contractors now are getting paid 4 times more to plant a tree and truck water it over 3 years than we are for our community stewardship model. The community stewardship model is so cost effective. And why is it important? Because 85% of the urban forest is on private property. The city only has to worry about 10 to 15% of the urban forest. And yet almost all the funding they've ever spent has just been for their little bit of property. So those are some of those big issues. Nonprofits certainly can plant the seed. We've been a pain in the side of the city for as long as we have been around. And at the same time, we have a good partnership in many ways. If you look at limited progress as progress, but we know what could be done. And some of you are talking about that vision. And it could be so much better. And the streets need to be designed with trees in mind. They should not be an after cosmetic like decoration. And that's kind of the regard in which they get. Just one last thing. I want you to know that as we speak, 400 trees are being removed to put in 3 warehouses in North San Jose. And my arborist and I drove through there, and we saw where over half of those could easily be saved if they had reconfigured it. But that takes a conversation. That takes leadership. That did not happen. But unlike we have successes for 101, we saved, 80 redwood trees from being felled because a neighborhood group came forward. Again, it's always the community that needs to drive these things. We partnered with them. We sat down with Caltrans, and Caltrans said, "Oh, I guess we can reroute this." If that meeting hadn't happened, all those redwood trees would have come down, and they would have had noise forever. So I hope this gives you a little bit of insight on some of the goings on about trying to manage an urban forest and being a nonprofit in such a big city. And that there are nonprofits everywhere that have the same struggles as we do. So, it's nothing personal, but I'm just glad to see that trees are getting more attention. I really appreciate your help. Thank you.
All right. Can I get the microphone, Rhonda? Rhonda? I think maybe we have a few questions, actually. Let me hang out with you.
I don't know.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know exactly who this might be directed toward. In today's San Jose Mercury News, in the business section, there is a profile of a woman who's in real estate and really bemoaning the lack of starter homes. And there was probably just some stock photo of a new development, and there was not one single tree in the. It's just like house after house after house. And rather than have to remedy the problem some years later, it would be nice if there was a way that when projects get built, that the trees were required. But of course, that adds to cost, which then affects affordability. I mean, short of trying to get law that you've got to plant trees, developers. What do we do? I mean, I guess that is our only choice.
Yeah, that's a good observation. I'm not sure which city that was.
I think it was probably a stock photo.
Oh, yeah.
I don't think
Because in
like
San Jose, and I'm sure most cities, trees are a requirement for developers to plant. The interesting thing is, so they form like a special district if they need to, and the city runs it like a separate program for that, and we're never invited part of that tree planting.
So City of San Jose does have a requirement for development to trees at the time that they build the house.
Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. I'm glad to see your organization is trying to get some commitment about the maintenance of the trees. That's the big thing. I think it was on PBS television, where I can't remember which city, I think it was Detroit, and a lot of well-meaning people from the city and community activists got together and said, we need to put trees in. And they forgot to consult with the neighborhood. And the neighborhood actually fought the city and that community group because they weren't consulted. And they brought up maintenance issues and things like that, and they said, well, this is going to cost somebody either my time or taxes or something. So that kind of opened my eyes too, because I've always been kind of like, get green everywhere. Well, there's a cost.
Where was that?
It was Detroit. Was it Detroit? Thank you. Maybe it's on the same program. Yeah. And that really opened my eyes to that program. I mean, it sounds like you're way ahead of the curve on that. Is the fact that you're trying to, the full picture is that there's a cost, and the benefits accrue to everybody, which is interesting. It's a private, when it's on private property, you put it clean, but it benefits everybody in the neighborhood. So I just think you're on the right track. You got to get some money from the city to help with some of these projects. How you divide that up, that's kind of a political question. How do you get the most benefit out of the trees for the most people? Maybe that's the way we should look at it. But I appreciate it. Sounds like you're a model.
Thank you.
For the rest.
Yeah, and unfortunately, you don't see any cost-benefit analysis. It's just kind of done in the way that things tend to always get done, maybe, you might say.
I have a question. So I'm a renter, but I live in the neighborhood I live in. Are there any programs that incentivize homeowners that rent out their homes, like landlords? are there any programs that incentivize landlords? Because as a renter, I would be, as a renter without any, I don't have a tree on my property and my backyard is very warm. But I have a big space, and I'm wondering, and actually in my neighborhood uses the county pocket, so there's a lot of big lots. And a lot of people have taken their trees out, and so our neighborhood has even less trees. And so, but I do know we have a lot of renters as well. And so, what would be, for renters like me, are there programs that incentivize landlords, or could there be?
You know, Councilmember Foley actually enacted or got a program funded. It's a very small amount of funding, but still the concept is so great, and that is to give a rebate to everyone. Now, in the case of a renter, it should go to the property owner, right? It should always go to whoever is signing off to receive that tree. And I think a lot more could be done with that, because there, as you say, there are some reasons why people don't want trees. But again, and I didn't even talk at all about our education, initiatives and everything. If the most important thing that we do is education. We're constantly trying to increase awareness as to the value of trees, not just how to plant them, but just the fact that they're important. And one of that is health benefits. And I think if more people understood, if you ever wonder, where do your tires go before you recycle them? How did they get bald? They got bald because they're in the air. Your tires are in the air, and you're inhaling all those particulates. And shade trees are just phenomenal at filtering those out of your lungs. And there's a lot of research showing to prove that. And so, if people understood how important it is for their families that they have trees around them, and all of the points that you made today, that is nothing's more important than that, so that they don't take their tree out or move in and then somehow,
I think that's why it's like what you all do is so important, because I know for the trees that were taken out, people took out trees because they were like messing with their front yard pipes or whatever. And so being able to have an organization that can help you determine which tree is the right one for you to plant, so you're not just planting like random trees that may not, like being able to have some consultation around that. So I just love what you're saying about actually thinking through like a design, right? Like what type of tree should go here. Because I know that our neighbors would love to have trees. Some of them taking them out, and some of them think that it's too difficult to have them. So I'll definitely look into Councilmember Foley. Thank you for the presentation.
But I think what they did, she originally designed it for district, but then they made it citywide. So I believe, if you contact us, in fact, if you came to our nursery even, for example, and we talked to you about the trees, but you're a renter, so that process, we make sure.
I'm going to call my landlord, though. I already emailed my landlord tonight.
We make sure that that rebate process happens. You don't have to go through the city.
Awesome.
Yeah.
The grant funding is farmers in the Midwest are actually in the government. We'll get trees all covered up. Oh.
That's a very complicated issue.
Repeat the question. Yeah, we couldn't hear it.
He's talking about carbon offsets and how the farmers have been able to use those. But it's kind of it's very complicated, and some of the state money that we get has a tie to that, and that's when we measure all of our GHG, emission offsets. It's how far the tree is planted from a building. We have to report that. The species, and a lot of different things to determine what those offsets are. But again, they don't measure so many of the benefits of trees, like cleaning the air. I mean, they do have some, I take that back, particulate and as well as ozone and all of that. But a lot of the benefits can't be measured. They're intangible. But it's complicated, and we don't really get involved in that. I think it's more at the higher level, like the state is involved with that, and they can implement a program where individual groups can take advantage. but it's always a good thing to remember to look into, and when you figured it out, give me a call.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rhonda.
Thank you.
And Rhonda was a last-minute addition to our program today, so I definitely want to give her an extra thank you for making time today on her Sunday to be here and give us such great information. You know, last-minute confirmation. We'll put it like that. So, I wanted to give Rhonda and Darcy and all of our speakers as much time as possible to talk. So I'm going to speed through my portion a little bit, and then we'll give everyone here about 15 minutes towards the end to continue asking questions, to talk to each other, to talk to any of the speakers that we had here today. So, Alex, if we could go through the slides. So I really wanted to highlight some of the, physical and mental health benefits that can be created thanks to more investment and more engagement around our urban forestry. And so the big three that come up when we talk about, the quality of the air, when we talk about the heat, is really, outcomes related to respiratory illnesses, people with asthma, people with other lung issues, these offsets that Rhonda was mentioning from the trees, cleaning the air, taking in some of that particulate matter, it can actually prevent outcomes of like asthma attacks, particularly in the summer when some of those health issues are compounded because of the heat. And I think here in the South Bay, we all know exactly how the heat can be. I mean, we're in October and we're in the middle of a heat wave, right? So definitely didn't think we would be handling that today, right, in October, but definitely pertinent to our conversation. So there's some images in the presentations that you'll all receive about how the trees not only kind of absorb the air and clean it on the way out, but they create the shade. So it's kind of like a double system, right? They're cleaning the air, they're making it fresher, and they're also creating the shade space. So they're definitely adding to the heat, to the climate resilience of our neighborhoods. And the other one is the cardiovascular health. So people with particular, heart diseases, various heart pressure issues, the heat can really exacerbate that. So when we're talking about 5-degree differences between some of our neighborhoods, that can be very significant for our older population. In particular, that's just ambient temperature that we're talking about. We're not talking about asphalt temperature. We're not talking about the temperature of the car or the windows or our roofs, which can be more than those 5 degrees. So all of those differences actually are more significant than that measure. And then the third one is physical health, right? All of our, weight management, a lot of it can be mitigated by being able to walk, right? 20 to 30 minutes of walking can be significant in how, people manage their weight, manage their diabetes. And having access to a park like this, having access to shaded sidewalks can really make a difference on whether or not people feel comfortable taking that walk after dinner. And in particularly for children, there's some cool data in the slides that you'll all receive about health outcomes for children related to their weight management, but also their behavioral outcomes. So there's some interesting studies that are coming out now that children that have physical outlets like parks, like walkable communities, have better outcomes related to behavioral issues and some other kind of social determinants of health and things like that. So, whether or not we are able to take that walk after dinner, take that walk after school, can have, incremental outcomes on our physical health. And then just to share a little bit about our mental health, whether or not we are able to sit in the shade or even see a tree. So some of the data says that even in hospitals, people that are able to look out of the window and see a tree have better health outcomes. So being able to plant trees around our hospitals, plant trees in our neighborhoods, can actually have a measured impact in how we recover from injuries, how we recover from illnesses, and things like that. And part of that is mental, part of that is physical. It all really comes together in a really holistic way that can motivate all of our communities to push forward and be more empowered and push for some of those outcomes. If we kind of have some of this information at the top of our head, right, if we can have these conversations with each other, with those decision makers, about why it's important to invest in these trees and invest in the maintenance, like Rhonda said, right? It's not just about planting the trees. It's not just about the aesthetic look. But it's about the long-term investment in the wellness of our communities. Darcy also mentioned the crime outcomes related to mental health challenges and the tree canopy. And actually, access to shade, access to fresh air can actually reduce aggressive behavior in a lot of populations and reduce the incidence of violent actions. So having, you know, a tree canopy in your neighborhood and being able to, let's say, you know what, I just got mad, let me go outside and take a walk, like that can really have a significant outcome in how we relate to each other and how we build power. And one that actually really surprised me while I was looking through the research was how tree canopies and green spaces can actually build power within communities. I think we all kind of talked a little bit about the environmental injustice, about some of these discrepancies in investments around the tree canopy, around urban forestry. And so all of us actively investing in that can kind of mitigate some of those historical challenges, right? But to Rhonda's point, it takes leadership. It takes all of us kind of sitting around the table, breaking bread together, and becoming more familiar with these challenges. So I think that, you know, I see a lot of nodding faces. I feel like we all understand the value of trees. I think we all know, you know, some of the mental and physical benefits, and you'll all receive the slide deck that I send out. One last thing that I want to mention as far as, like, you know, where we are here in Santa Clara, and there is some cool, like, maps on the slides that will kind of showcase this. But Santa Clara, you know, has committed itself to planting more trees as a city, right? They have programs, they have things they want to do, but if you look at the map, you see that there are still areas, particularly where there's really new development, where the trees are really young, right? Or where there's really not a lot of trees, or there's not a lot of, like, uncemented spaces for trees in some of these new areas, particularly, I think, as we get closer to the 101. But then right next door you have the Garden District, right, which has really historically beautiful trees that have been there for decades and actually cover the whole street. So they don't just cover the sidewalk, but they cover the whole street. So that can have a really significant outcome on their temperature there. So while the city is committed, you know, there's clearly a gap there, right? We haven't caught up to our neighbors, so in Santa Clara yet. So I'd love to hear from the residents who are here, you know, what do you experience or what do you see in the neighborhood when you walk around? Where are those gaps that are needed to fill in the tree canopy, or where maybe we can, you know, get more patches of grass, more patches of green? Does anything come to mind? Yeah.
Well, go ahead. You go first.
Well, first of all, we are lucky. This is our neighborhood. So we come here. We didn't know this was happening. We came here and we found it happening. Today, but so we walk through a lot of places. But we do tend to look for, on the warm days, we look for a shakier street. Because some streets, you go, you know, a long steep block and there are no trees. And yes, this is a tree city. But, you know, whether they be cut down or what, I'm not sure. I know, you know, we had instances where they dig up the sidewalk because, you know, tree roots. And, you know, some people, you know, that's a hazard for people in wheelchairs. So, you know, there's a bit of a trade-off there. I don't know. I mean, having a lot of parks, I think, is almost a better solution, and like in every single neighborhood. And we do have a lot of parks, so actually we are lucky. We have another park as well, very close.
So I've been complaining for years. El Camino Real in Santa Clara is really blighted. There's no trees. As soon as you cross into Sunnyvale, you see a lot of trees there. And then if you're on Stevens Creek, on the south side of San Jose, you see big trees there. On the north side, Santa Clara, there's no trees. Santa Clara, for being a tree city,
I can speak to that. We just heard from a council member. Now you hear from an employee who worked for 30, former employee who worked on the streets. And I'm all for more trees. And I would like to see. It's interesting to Santa Clara. It's interesting to hear some people from the east side of San Jose. And I know a little bit about. I've lived in the valley for a very long time. And it's interesting, Santa Clara. If you live in an apartment complex here, those are generally where the trees are around our streets, considered street trees, but they are maintained by the property owners. And we're talking big trees. And where you don't see trees is in some of the single-family detached home tracts. Yeah, and that's where we, you know, when we came here today, we tried to follow where the apartments are. You know, and I live in a multi-family complex, and we have hundreds of trees, about 300 trees on 6 acres. and it's unusual. So, it's designed by a landscape architect. So, the trees are necessary to keep the whole city cooler, and I just think it should be, after you're a council member, is that we need to have a bigger program for the city to maintain the street trees. Maybe even take them from the private property, because a lot of the street trees in Santa Clara, which you think are street trees, they're near the street, but they are in the city right away, but they're maintained by the private property owner. And that's problematic, depending on how much funds and things. We really ought to just, because we all live in the city, we all live in cities. We ought to take that and make it a public resource. And I'm so happy we have nonprofits filling in on the private and try to help the city too. That's great. But we need to really just say we're all in this together. Let's pay the taxes, and get that fixed. And one last comment about the maintenance. That was one of the biggest parts of my job was to go around. They had a sidewalk maintenance program, and we go through and remove sections. And this is, like you mentioned, is an expensive ongoing thing, but the city does that depending on the funds. And we actually cut out flags of concrete, the score mark, leave the curb, take out curbs sometimes, cut roots selectively with the arborist looking at it. It's very expensive to keep those trees going. And last I'll say is I just saw a program about a completely new town in, I think it was Finland, it was on PBS, and they've got all the city planners in there, and they were thinking about trees from the beginning. So they have decided to use smaller trees to reduce the pavement damage and the maintenance. So you can maintain it from the ground. You don't need a big lift truck. You don't have to climb up the tree. So they decided to go with smaller trees. So I know our tree selection, our city is starting to bring them down. So.
I would have a
yeah.
outlook on that.
Okay, well.
The largest canopy has the most environmental benefits.
Oh, yeah.
Both to reduce temperatures in the city and to filter the particulates in the air. Most sidewalk damage isn't caused by the roots themselves. It's caused because they're not being deep watered.
Yeah.
They're often being watered by irrigation, by lawn sprinklers. And so the roots kind of like, can I get more water? Can I get more water? And they come to the top, or clay pipes, an old sewer system, or that is cracked, and it's leaking water, and the roots are going after that water.
I'll just make it. That's very good. And in terms, that's why the city has a standard for flat. This is what you don't see on private property. The city arborists help design it. We have a landscape architects look at it. There's tubes that go down, and that's where you're supposed to water to get the water down. No, but well,
because
if you just
tubes.
What? What? Go ahead.
Those tubes, just so you know.
Yeah.
CAL FIRE won't even pay for those because they are not good for you. So what happens is that when a tree is first planted, you need to water around the root ball.
Oh, yeah.
And if you put water down these tubes, it never makes it to the root ball.
Oh, no.
But people, so the tubes don't leave. I mean, some of them have holes down there, but we actually, CAL FIRE won't pay for this because it's not a best practice. And that's the first way to
Yeah, no, but you water the ball when it's young. As it gets older, you want deep water.
What we mean by deep water is if you let the hose trickle for a long time, for 20 minutes until it just seeps down. But if people could do what you're saying, then that makes sense. It's just that is sometimes they inherit their tree or whatever, they don't know.
Yeah.
I think we have one more question over here. Did you have a question or a comment?
This area has a lot of places back east, especially malls, they've gone through trees in the parking lot. What's the way of getting around the parking lot?
That's really interesting to bring up here in Santa Clara, and I know Alex probably has more information about that because he takes a look at our parking policy measures and things like that, but we've definitely been part of a policy action movement to reduce the parking requirements related to new development in Santa Clara to make the most of that space. So many of them, there's a bunch of data out now about how much of that space actually stays empty throughout the day. So all of those parking lots that we all see related to office buildings or the mall, like you said, most of them, I think it's like 60% or something like that, don't even get used throughout the day regularly. So thinking of them as tree havens is actually a really creative solution for two problems that we've been facing.
And we can use our CAL FIRE grant in parking lots
Oh.
in the restricted census tracts. So we just need people.
He's too small as he parks there.
So we have maybe about 5 more minutes together, everyone. Before we close out today, I wanted to make a few announcements. I definitely wanted to thank Councilmember Jane for being here today. Thank you so much for registering and giving a donation to the organization. We really appreciate. For those of you that don't know, he was the winner last year of our Catalyzing Change Awards for elected officials who are engaged in the community. And so, definitely a big supporter of community action, community power building, and thank you so much. We also again want to thank our sponsors, Casa Permanente and the City of San Jose, for helping us put on this event and bringing dinner and supplies for everyone. We hope to put on more conversations like this in 2024, or hopefully better attended conversations like this. As you all know, we've been looking for ways to make hybrid events more interesting, more engaging for everyone, to build knowledge and build power in our community. You'll all receive our contact information, the information, and the web pages for the speakers that you heard from today. And of course, a post-event survey for any questions or comments that you have that maybe you didn't get to today, so that we can share them with the speakers, internalize them. We always want to hear your thoughts about the topics that you heard about today, or if there's anything else about development that you're interested in learning more about, or interested in volunteering in regards to. We'd definitely love to hear that. We're in the middle right now of planning our 2024 calendar, so any feedback we receive will actually be super helpful. So I definitely want to thank our remaining speakers, Rhonda and Darcy. Thank you so much for a great conversation. You know, I can put together a slide deck and I can quote all the research, but I think hearing from the experts in the field, hearing from leaders in the field who are doing the work and connecting with each other and amplifying each other's voices, I think it's a more impactful content for everyone, and makes for a better event. So thank you both of you for making time today. And with that, I encourage all of you to take seconds, take a plate, take a drink. Oh yes, and our next event on November 30th, we have our Catalyzing Change Awards. It'll be at the San Jose Women's Club. We will be fundraising for the organization for our annual events like this, and then we will be awarding community members, nonprofits, government elected officials who do really good community engagement, who care about amplifying community voices and empowering the community. So nominate yourselves, nominate your friends. Definitely help us kind of celebrate and amplify those people that are out here doing good work. Nominations are due by October 30th, and you will all get the form.
And Catherine was one of our winners last year.
Oh yeah, our volunteer catalyzing change.
Yes. That's right, yeah. How much does Center Housing have?
Yeah, no problem.
Of the neighbors, they're actually
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it. Oh, I need to capture your information. Let me grab my pen.
Sharing the one.
Yeah, thank you.